Hello, I'm Ben and you're watching The PhD Parent. So up to 30% of parents describe their kid as having a sleep problem. So if you reckon your kid has a sleep problem, then you're not alone. The most common sleep problems reported by parents are their kid not sleeping enough, frequent night waking, and the kid not going to sleep when you put him into bed. Sometimes parents can have unrealistic expectations about kids' sleep, and so may think their kid has a problem when in fact everything is as expected. If you'd like to know more about normal sleep behaviours in kids, then you can check out my video in which I discuss sleep duration across a 24-hour period, another video in which I discuss nighttime sleep patterns, and a video in which I discuss daytime sleep patterns. The links to those videos are down below. But if you do have a kid with sleep problems, which you won't need to be convinced can have a significant negative impact, and you want to know what you might be able to do about it, then keep watching. Because in this video, I'll review studies that have investigated the impact of graded extinction, otherwise known as sleep training, on sleep problems in kids up to 3 years old. So the current video is actually one in a series that looks at sleep interventions for kids up to 3 years old. So first, just a couple of background bits. In each video in the series, only studies that are randomized control trials, or RCTs, are considered, as this approach provides the most powerful test of whether an intervention is effective in reducing sleep problems compared to other approaches. For more on RCTs, you can check out my video in the link below. For the purposes of the videos in this series, I harvested references from several recent reviews, plus my own Google Scholar search. Some of the studies I came across involved recruiting kids up to 3 years old and used an RCT design. However, the sample sizes in these studies were very small, for example, less than 10 kids in a condition. Because studies with such small sample sizes can't provide confidence in the results, I chose not to include these studies. So in this video, I'm going to review graded extinction. In a different video, I review studies investigating the impact of the types of sleep strategies you come across on parenting websites, podcasts, books, and so on, and also have another video in which I look at the evidence for bedtime routines. The links to those videos are down below. For the moment though, it's on to graded extinction. So graded extinction, which you may know as controlled crying or sleep training, I think, it's not really clear what people mean by sleep training, involve parents not immediately responding to the cries, tantrums, protests, and from here on I'll just say cries, of children when they're in bed, but responding to these cries after a prescribed period of time, which is slowly increased to give the child an opportunity to learn to independently settle. So in the following, I'll give you an example of what a graded extinction intervention might look like, and this is based on Duran 2008. So you've got to stick to a regular bedtime. On the first night, start with a response interval between 3 to 5 minutes. Put the kid in bed using your regular bedtime routine at the set regular bedtime. If your kid is crying when they go to bed, after the designated response interval, for example 3 minutes, go into the room to briefly settle them, maybe 15 seconds, and then leave. When doing so, no picking the kid up, no food or drink, and no extensive interaction. Thereafter, wait for the designated response interval before going back into the room. Continue this until your child has fallen asleep or you reckon it's okay to wait longer. On subsequent nights, you extend the response interval by 2 to 3 minutes. Now, there doesn't appear to be a magic number for how long the response intervals should be, how quickly they should be ramped up, and how much they should increase by. Some studies suggested parents should check the kid's physical safety, presumably if there's reason to suspect there could be a problem, before then commencing ignoring of their cries. So I found 8 RCTs that use some version of extinction. One study looked at behavior before bed, so I'll ignore this one as it's not really relevant. 5 studies had samples that I consider to be too small, that is typically less than 18 participants per condition. While I'll still review these, I don't think you can be confident in their findings as a result of the small samples. And finally, there were 2 studies with decent samples, but I'll start with the studies that had small sample sizes. Now these days I think you'd have a tough time getting the following studies published, as reviewers are quick to jump on studies in small samples, though you could probably get away with calling them pilot studies. And one thing to mention about these studies is that the results are almost exclusively based on parental self-reports of sleep behaviors. So here are the studies and their findings. So Sade, in a sample of about 50 kids, compared graded extinction to co-sleeping, that is, parents sleeping in the same room as the kid. Across the study, kids' sleep improved and there were no differences between the 2 conditions in terms of any sleep outcomes. Now, while you might be tempted to conclude that these results suggest that graded extinction is beneficial, although no more beneficial than co-sleeping, because there was no control condition in which no intervention was delivered, you can't attribute the observed sleep improvements to the interventions. They could instead reflect improvements in sleep that would otherwise naturally occur, for example, as kids get older. So next, Blunden, in a sample of about 30 kids, compared an extinction procedure to a graded removal of responding condition and a control condition. In the graded removal of responding condition, over a few days, parents slowly reduced the amount of physical touch and talking they gave to their child while trying to get them to sleep. In the control condition, parents just did whatever they normally did. Now, without going into details, the analysis of the data was not appropriate, but there didn't seem to be any differences in terms of sleep outcomes between the conditions. That is, neither intervention was superior to the control condition, so no suggestion that graded extinction is beneficial. Next, Reed, in a sample of about 45 kids, compared a graded extinction to non-graded extinction and a weightless control. The graded extinction condition was like the example described initially. In the non-graded extinction, parents only checked on the kid if necessary, and if a kid left their room, parents were instructed to close the kid's bedroom door or a child gate was used to keep them in the bedroom. The main outcomes of interest were if the kid settled in less than 10 minutes, or if the kid slept through the night without sleeping with their parents or waking up their parents. The results showed that, compared to the weightless control kids in the two extinction conditions more often settled within 10 minutes and were more likely to sleep through the night without bugging their parents. So the results of this study suggest that extinction, whether graded or not, is potentially beneficial in improving sleep compared to doing nothing. However, this study highlights the common criticism of the extinction approach. So I'll start with a hypothetical. Suppose you have two kids, Jane and Jill. Both kids wake up 3 times a night. However, upon waking, Jane will lay in her bed peacefully, whereas Jill will yell and scream and cry, with her parents getting up to attend to her each time. Despite both kids waking up the same number of times, I'm guessing that only Jill's parents would report that their kid has a sleep problem. In this case, if you reduce the number of times Jill wakes up at night, then Jill's parents would no longer report that she has a sleep problem. But if you simply eliminated Jill's fussing when she wakes up, then I reckon Jill's parents also would no longer report that she has a sleep problem. This is, in part, because if a kid doesn't make a sound when they wake up, the parent isn't likely to know that they're awake. So, returning to Reed, it's possible that both the extinction conditions may have simply reduced the likelihood of a kid crying out for their parents. And this is particularly so with the non-graded extinction, where parents were instructed to shut the door on the kid if they got out of bed and so on. Maybe the kid just learns not to bother their parents. Thus, it's not clear that kids in the extinction conditions were waking less often during the night, or whether they were waking as often as before, but were no longer crying out for their parents. I'm not suggesting the latter shouldn't be considered a win. Some parents may be perfectly happy with that outcome. It's only to say that, to be confident in claiming a change in actual sleep behaviours, such as night waking, you want an objective measure of sleep. So now on to Rickett and Johnson, who compared a non-graded extinction condition to a scheduled awakenings condition and a control condition in which parents were told things would improve over time. There are about 10 kids in each condition. The non-graded extinction condition involved ignoring crying, no soothing, as little interaction as possible, and no feeding if the kid was crying. Seems a bit daft if the kid is crying because they're hungry, but whatever. The scheduled awakening condition involved parents waking the kid at set times, at which point they could soothe the kid, change their nappy, feed them, rock them, and so on. The results showed that kids in both the extinction and scheduled awakening conditions woke less during the night than kids in the control condition, and there was no difference between the two intervention conditions. So the results of this study suggest that extinction can lead to improvements in sleep compared to doing nothing. But apparently so can a scheduled awakening, and extinction is not superior to scheduled awakening. Again, it's possible that the extinction condition led to a genuine reduction in the number of nighttime wakings, but it's also possible it was simply reducing crying when waking. In truth, you could say the same about the scheduled awakenings condition, though it seems a little bit less plausible that scheduled awakening would reduce the likelihood of a kid crying when they wake up. At any rate, once more, an objective measure of sleep would be helpful, which brings me to the final study. So Gradisar compared graded extinction to bedtime fading and to a sleep education condition, with about 15 kids in each condition. After 3 months, the researchers found that kids in the graded extinction and bedtime fading conditions showed improvements in how long it took them to go to sleep, about a 10-minute improvement, whereas there was no change in the sleep education condition. Compared to the bedtime fading and sleep education conditions, kids in the graded extinction condition showed a bigger reduction in the number of times they woke at night, about once less. However, it looks as though this was just because the kids in the graded extinction group were worse off to start with. Finally, compared to the bedtime fading and sleep education conditions, kids in the graded extinction condition showed a greater improvement in total sleep time, about 20 minutes better than before treatment, but this result was only evident when based upon parental reports. When measured objectively using actigraphy, there was no such difference. For whatever reason, the researchers didn't report the actigraphy data for the previous 2 outcomes. So, the results of this study suggest that graded extinction may lead to improvements in how long it takes kids to get to sleep, but it's no better than bedtime fading. And same issue as before. That is, it's possible that kids in the graded extinction condition were simply stopping crying out for their parents. I'm less convinced that the results demonstrate graded extinction has benefits in terms of improvements in night wakings and total sleep time. In summary, across these studies, there's some evidence to suggest that graded extinction may reduce the amount of time it takes a kid to get to sleep and the number of times a kid wakes up at night. But it's not clear if graded extinction is simply reducing the amount of crying a kid does. And there is little evidence that graded extinction is better than other interventions such as co-sleeping, scheduled awakenings, or bedtime fading. Finally, the small sample sizes in these studies don't provide much confidence in the results reported, which makes it a good time to move on to the studies with bigger samples. So the two studies in this section improve on the previous ones in that they had reasonably healthy sample sizes. In the first study, Hiscock and Wake recruited about 160 infants who were assigned either to a graded extinction condition or a control group in which parents were provided with information about normal sleep patterns in infants. To foreshadow an issue I'll touch on later, parents in the graded extinction condition were also permitted to camp out, which involved a parent sitting with their infant until the infant fell asleep. In addition, they were provided with a sleep management plan and information about the development and management of sleep problems. In the second study, Hiscock recruited about 330 infants, and from what I can tell, the design was the same as Hiscock and Wake. The results of these studies were as follows. In Hiscock and Wake, 2 months after the intervention, more children in the intervention group had overcome their sleep problems compared to the control group. About 70% versus 50% had improved. However, 4 months after the intervention, the two groups did not differ. In Hiscock, 3 months after the intervention, more children in the intervention group had overcome their sleep problems compared to the control group. About 45% versus 30% had improved. And this difference remained 5 months after the intervention, where it was about 60% versus 45% had improved. In summary, the results of this research are consistent with the idea that graded extinction is an effective approach for addressing sleep problems in kids, though it's not clear how long any such benefits last. Having said that, same old issue, without an objective measure of sleep, you can't rule out the possibility that graded extinction was reducing crying rather than leading to genuine improvements in sleep. And as mentioned, another major problem is that the graded extinction intervention also involved providing parents with other strategies that could plausibly improve sleep. That is, camping out, a sleep management plan, and information about the management of sleep problems. Thus, any observed benefit of the intervention could be due to these other strategies rather than graded extinction. And if you were going to be strict about it, you would say that you can't conclude anything about graded extinction based on these studies. Now, one last issue before bringing everything together. So graded extinction has been the focus of some controversy. It's common to see people worried about potential negative impacts it may have on kids, and many parents don't find the approach appealing. For example, some studies have reported that 10 to 33% of parents are unwilling to use this approach, with others indicating that the figure might be as high as 70%. The exact reasons for this are not clear, but one obvious reason is because the approach requires you to ignore the cries of your kid. Now, I'm only aware of 4 studies that have investigated whether graded extinction has a negative impact on kids, the results of which I'll take you through now. All of these studies have been described previously. So Gradisar looked at cortisol levels as a marker of stress in kids each morning and afternoon. Higher cortisol equals bad. So across a 3-month period, there was no evidence that the kids in the graded extinction conditions differed in terms of morning cortisol levels compared to the bedtime fading or sleep education conditions. If anything, the kids in the graded extinction condition showed lower levels of afternoon cortisol relative to the comparison conditions. In addition, the researchers also looked at emotional and behavioral problems in kids and attachment styles using the strange situation procedure. There were no differences between the conditions in terms of emotional and behavioral problems or attachment, that is, the kid's relationship with their parent. London likewise found no differences in terms of cortisol level in kids exposed to an extinction intervention relative to comparison conditions. Next, Reed looked at emotional and behavioral problems in kids. There were no differences between the graded extinction conditions and the weightless control condition in terms of such problems, 2 months after the intervention had ended. Finally, Price followed up kids from Hiscock when they were 6 years old. There were no differences between kids in the intervention and control conditions in terms of emotional and behavioral problems, sleep habits, quality of life, attachment, or chronic stress as indicated by cortisol levels. So, there's no evidence that graded extinction has a negative impact on emotional and behavioral problems in kids, nor does this approach appear to undermine a kid's attachment with their parents. Now, that's not to say that there is no negative impact, only that there's no evidence to show this. So in summary, the studies reviewed provide some support for the use of graded extinction in kids between the ages of 6 months to 3 years old. That is, all studies involve kids older than 6 months, and so there's no evidence supporting the use of this approach in kids less than 6 months old. And it does not appear that graded extinction has any lasting negative impacts on young kids. However, there's no strong evidence that graded extinction is superior to other sleep interventions, such as co-sleeping, scheduled awakenings, or bedtime fading. But it's tough to be confident in these conclusions due to several methodological issues that compromise the studies reviewed, including small sample sizes, lack of objective sleep assessment, and confounds resulting from the delivery of multiple sleep strategies within the same intervention condition. So, that's it for graded extinction. If there's anything I've gotten wrong, any important research I've overlooked, or if you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, happy parenting.